Great. And I'll upload it.
Great. So everybody gets to approve. Um, so then, my plan is to spend about half of our 90 minutes um, with some content. The content's really designed to provoke you. I mean, this whole material provokes me and has for 30 years and never stopped provoking me. And that's part of the beautiful art of it, of learning to really live from responsibility thinking. And so the material's designed to provoke you, and I want you to start jotting down questions. And we're going to use the latter half of the time, 45 minutes, for Q&A, 40 to 45 minutes maybe. Um, if you have a question for clarification or understanding while we're going, by all means, stop me and ask me. I believe your questions are as important or more important than my content. And I'm here for you. I'm not here for my content. And so that means, since it's so few of us, really, is that invites you to turn on your camera, if you will, and come join us. I would love if you rename yourself to include your geographic location. My location is lying today. I am not in Austin, Texas. So Jacqueline, I know the 10 o'clock hour in our time zone works so well for calls that span the US and Europe. I'm actually in Northwest Ohio, hanging out in Bowling Green, Ohio, today after being in Chicago and Detroit this week. So, um, and I've made some people co-host, and I've asked you if you would change your name to include your location. There's four ways to do that. Three of them are available to you within your own window, and one is clicking over your name. The other is clicking the little ellipses at the top right. One is going to the participant icon in the control bar and finding yourself there and clicking on the ellipse and doing it. And the fourth is actually in your Zoom settings. There's a place where there's a field where you can write what you want people to see as your name every time you log on. So that's why mine says Austin, Texas instead of Bowling Green, Ohio today. All right, here we go. Um, oops. So I should probably tell you, this is going to be weird. I should probably tell you I'm in a makeshift studio in a hotel room, and I've moved all the furniture around and played with lights and played with the wallpaper to try and find a way to do this in the way I like that allows me to project the responsibility process. And now I just found out that you're not going to see my cards that I hold up unless I put them right in front of me. So I might stand up. Oh, I can't even do that. All right. So I hope you're okay with no slide share. I like the good old low-tech analog way of doing this. So we're going to start with this. Uh, I want to start by introducing the two-mind model of our minds. And the idea of a two-mind model of our minds is not new. It's been around for eons. It's generally accepted by lots and lots of people. It's not the only model of the mind, but it is a useful model of the mind. And what this mind says is that we have a lower mind and an upper mind. And let me see. There we go. And what's really interesting is that you probably can't see this terribly well. I'll read it to you. The lower mind is offered to as the ego mind, the defensive mind, or the resistant mind. The upper mind is often referred to as the resource mind, the creative mind, the generative mind, the growth mind. So, have you seen this model? Are we okay to move forward with consensus around this being kind of a widely used idea about how the mind works? In other words, we have a more brilliant mind, and we kind of have a silly, stupid mind. And it's true for all of us and everybody we know. True for me. That's why I love this material. And then the really important thing to look at is what are our drivers in these two minds. And again, I know that, so usually I can hold this up and you're able to see it, and I'm sorry that I didn't figure out how to do that today. I apologize. So I'll read it to you. So, oh, and by the way, I'm going to give you all these scans. So you'll have access to a scan, PDF scan of all of this. And yes, Scott, you'll be able to share it with the video. So, what are the drivers, right? What are the kind of invisible, not so conscious drivers in each of these minds that are that are that are making us perceive certain things? So, lower mind, approval, safety, and control. Approval, safety, and control. And who has to provide that approval, safety, and control? Usually we think that it comes from outside of us, right? So, what are the drivers in the upper mind? The drivers in the upper mind are your unique inspiration, your unique genius. What's not written here is your desire to fully express who you uniquely are. Right? And what it does say here is also a driver in the upper mind is what you really, 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 really want to experience for yourself in your life. Right? Those are the drivers in the upper mind. The, the issue is that society tends to focus on the lower mind when they are socializing us, when society is conditioning us, orienting us to be good citizens. They tend to focus on approval, safety, and control to mold us into the ethical, moral, good citizens that we are. Society does not understand and pay the same amount of attention to developing the upper mind in us. Oh, they give it lip service. They say, use your creativity, right? But you better have conformed first to what's expected of you. Right? So for me, this is a really useful way of thinking about what the study of and practice of responsibility does for us, because as you might see, we have the lower mind, right, and we have the upper mind. And so this becomes a signal device, right? In me, so we'll speak a little bit more about the responsibility process, but for me, this becomes a signal device in my mind that I can become aware of that lets me know when I'm being driven by my lower mind. And then I can make a choice about, is that really where I want to be driven in this situation, in this instance, right? Or do I want to move off of these mental states to a more resourceful, more creative, more growth oriented place where I can get closer to tapping into who I really am and fully express myself and be more authentic and use my own inspiration as opposed to external motivation in order to experience life, produce results, get things done. So then I'm going to introduce us to another model that can help us understand this. So Stephen Covey said, and it was a day after he'd been reading a bunch of other people like Viktor Frankl and Rollo May and somebody else. So this quote is all over the internet. This is misattributed to Viktor Frankl. And I misattributed it for years until I decided to actually take 100% responsibility for my sources. And I went looking for a citation for where Viktor Frankl said or wrote this. There is none. But you can find a citation for where Stephen Covey said it, and he was paraphrasing. So he says, in between stimulus and response is a space. In between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. And in that choice is our freedom and our power. Right? So that pretty much sums up everything about the perception of cause and effect and the practice of responsibility that I've been studying, using, applying, promoting, and teaching and mentoring people in for more than, well, about 30 years now. In between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. Right? And in those choices, in our choices, is our freedom and our power. And so let me tell you what happens in life as we grow. And this is fairly well understood developmental psychology. What happens as we grow, starting at a very early age, is we get corrected a lot, and we get criticized a lot, and we get judged, and we get evaluated a lot. And when that happens, we learn very quickly to operate in this zone of right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't. And because we want to feel safe around others, and because we want to be approved of, and we want to stay in control, then we work really hard to become more critical of ourselves than those around us, right? And we unconsciously create autopilot programs internally as if we don't already have enough negative programming. We create more negative programming in our own mind in order to stay in control. And so what happens is that instead of operating throughout our life with stimulus space response, we operate with stimulus react, stimulus react, stimulus react, stimulus react. And it's just an autopilot clicking in that we don't think about. We don't deliberate, right? So I'm just going to give you some crazy examples of this. Here's one. Boiled butternut squash is bad, right? It's bad. It's wrong, right? Now, why? Well, because I was first given boiled butternut squash as a kid, all mashed up, right? And I didn't like it. Yuck. And I had to stay at the table until I finished it. I don't know, I was 3 years old. And then a month or so later, I was given it again, but then the server decided to trick me and say, it's sweet potatoes mashed up. You like sweet potatoes mashed up, right? And I tried it and it was like, yeah! Right? I immediately created a program in my mind unconsciously, right? That stuff is bad, that stuff is wrong, and I will never, ever get close to that stuff again. Right? So that's just a stimulus. Stimulus, oh look, boiled, mashed up butternut squash, right? Response. So then we get a little older and we do things like, I'll never date a blonde again. Right? So we go out on a date, the person's blonde, we have a bad experience, and we assign it a cause, right? It's because they're blonde. Or I'll never date an engineer again. Or I'll never date a colleague. Or I'll never talk back to a supervisor, right? Or. So we have hundreds of thousands of these programs called reactions that we created ourselves unconsciously for our own safety, right? And what responsibility thinking does for us, what it's done for me, is for all of those reactions, that it gives me an opportunity to start prying stimulus and response apart just a little bit and creating some space in there for me to examine what's really going on in my own mind, in my own structure of ideas and perceptions and thoughts of cause and effect. And when I do that, right, then I can find, I don't know the right word, generate, create, observe new choices. Talk about experimentation, right? To me, practicing responsibility is the ultimate in reflection and retrospection and deciding on experiments in terms of modifying our choices. So this is what our mind looks like. Our mind looks like, all this aberration. These are all the reactions and negative programming and negative conditioning in our minds. It's kind of pollution. And it's not the content, right? It's the social context that we've put in place of how we process information. And for me, the practice of responsibility thinking and self-leadership and demonstrating responsibility is the practice of eliminating these one by one by one by one so that this space in our mind becomes clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer and more available to that space between stimulus and response. So to characterize this again, we have this idea of above the line and below the line, the above the line being the more resourceful, creative, generative growth mind, and below the line being the more ego-driven, defensive, resistant mind. And what I've found is that even with great frameworks like Agile, and I've been a student of organizational science for 35 years, and leadership, and I've looked at lots of movements, and for me, the Agile movement is the most effective, most amazing, most humanistic movement that there has been, to my knowledge, in the history of, call it management science and getting things done. However, still within the world of Agile, every day I encounter smart, successful, well-educated, high-wage earning people who are coping with lives that they don't know how they got there and don't know how to change. Right? And so these are even people who've adopted Agile and are, putting in the frameworks and doing all of that kind of stuff. This includes coaches. Gosh, I've had the opportunity to mentor so many coaches who are operating from good, bad, right, wrong, reaction, really a whole lot of this. The message is that for things around me to change, for things out there to change, first I have to change. So the idea of demonstrating self-leadership is the very essence of being able to lead anybody else, I believe. And so that's my work with coaches, is to help them see how they're creating their own reality over and over and over again. And if they want a different reality, they might want to start examining their own thoughts of cause and effect. So above the line, again, if you want to use the concept of lean, right? In our mind, in our actions, in our behaviors, in our communication, right? Everything below the line could be called waste. And yes, is there necessary waste? Absolutely, lean teaches there's necessary waste, right? So waste is everything the customer doesn't want to pay for. And is there stuff in every organization that's necessary to create the value stream that the customer doesn't want to pay for? Absolutely. So does that mean that there's stuff going in my mind that's necessary waste? Yeah, there is. And what that is that every time something goes wrong in my life, my mind goes to the bottom of this chart to lay blame, right? And so I actually have to work my way through these steps to get to the top. So, what's interesting is we cannot make the lower mind go away. Not without hundreds of thousands of hours of meditation and dedication to the monastic lifestyle and spiritual growth, right? There's only a very, 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 1/10 of 1%, oh, not even that, 1,000th of 1%, maybe of humans that can actually shut down the lower mind a little bit. So it's always there. It's always going to be there. You're not going to do anything about it in yourself or in anybody else. All you can do is recognize when you're there and figure out how to get yourself up. So if you've not been introduced to the responsibility process, this is a time for me to give you a little introduction. And what I have to tell you is that there are lots of 1 hour, 30-minute, 1 hour, 1.5 hour videos out there of me doing keynotes, of walking laboriously through the responsibility process and how it works. And so if you want more than I'm going to do today, I recommend that you do your own research. I produce a ton of content, so you could start at responsibility.com, or you could just search on my name, Avery, and the responsibility process, and you'll find tons of content. But here's the way it works. Every time something goes wrong, your mind goes to your mind goes into a hyperactive search for cause and effect. And the pattern in our mind seems to be that the first answer our mind hands us is an answer of blame, right? He did it, they did it, it's their fault. So if you want to look at this another way, complaining is blame, right? Who designed this way? You know? And when I say every time something goes wrong, something going wrong is when you've got a variance from what you want. Right? So the way it works is that we're going along in life and we're motivated towards some kind of a goal. Maybe it's just having a nice cup of tea. And we go to the kitchen there, maybe in the workplace, and we make our nice cup of tea, and we're headed back to our workstation, and we round a corner, and our elbow bumps something, and the tea goes flying across the front of us, right? And at this moment, we've got what we want, which is a force vector. It's energy in motion, right? E motion is energy in motion. And then we get stopped, right, from having what we want. And at that moment, we've got an internal conflict in our mind. We've got stasis in terms of, if you know force field theory of driving forces and restraining forces, and where they come together, we have stasis or equilibrium. Stasis means stopped, and when we have a problem, we say to each other, right, I'm stuck. What do? I'm stuck. And so at that moment, I have a problem. And when that happens, these two colliding thoughts, just little teeny tiny microjoules of energy in our mind, little teeny tiny microjoules of cognitions are colliding between what we want and what we have. And that generates anxiety, more microjoules of energy in our mind, angst, anxiety, upset, frustration, pissed offness, whatever you want to call it. Right? All of that stuff is because we don't have what we want. And at that time, our mind goes into a hyperactive search for cause and effect. How did this happen? Right? And that's when the responsibility process in our mind kicks in. It gets triggered. It gets triggered every time something goes wrong, every time we're thinking about what goes wrong. Ray, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question screaming at me. I believe in what you say, but I strongly, as a lay Buddhist, I don't practice as much now, but I still meditate. I strongly believe if you are in the moment, if you live in the now, it's not possible to have that anger when that tea crashes to the floor, because you are too in the moment, and anger cannot rise from that.
Right. And what percentage of the population is doing that?
A small percentage.
Yeah. Right.
But I just
Absolutely.
wanted to make that point, because what you're seeing, it doesn't rest with me, because I don't see that if you're in the moment. But anyway, carry on.
Well, then this isn't for you. Right. Then you don't need this.
Well, continue. I'm enjoying it.
It's so, so if nothing ever goes wrong in your world, then that's great, because then the responsibility process never gets triggered. That's awesome.
No, I never said that. If I said that, it would be completely nuts.
All right.
What I'm trying to say is that, and the other thing that hits me with this is I get a strong sense of a modern world and a 80 or 90s American films of tough business and people and all the rest of it, and then I get a feeling of, but we're not in that world anymore. We're actually moving into postmodern world where individuals have time to think about who they are, to interweave themselves with the things that happen to them, the things that they create. And it's what the thing you're describing to me doesn't resonate, because that world you describe of crashing into people outside workstation areas is the past.
Well, when did I ever say that somebody crashed into somebody? I just said their elbow bumped something.
Well, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying.
No, I don't know what you're trying to say at all, Ray.
Okay, carry on. Sorry for interrupting you.
That's okay. But what you'll find about me is when people say, or you know what I'm trying to say, if they're not clear about what they're saying, my answer is no, I don't know what you're trying to say.
That's absolutely fine.
So, so what I would say is I hear you saying that my material belongs 30 years ago.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I think my material is timeless. So
no, I absolutely agree with you. I'm not saying that.
All right, cool. So I will carry on, right? And we'll pick this up in a little bit. So, so something goes wrong, and what Ray says is actually very cool, because people do ask me, Christopher, is there any way that you can get to responsibility and stay there? And I say, yeah, live a life where you see more and more and more and more of everything as perfect, which is a spiritual teaching in every single major spiritual tradition and wisdom tradition, is to see this life and see this world as perfect as it is, given all antecedent conditions. So that means viewing the world less and less as right and wrong, and less as, should and shouldn't, and less as good and bad. However, that language, or that lack of language, is foreign to the workplace, right? We were heavily trained in school systems and in curricula and in processes and tools and thinking around right, wrong thinking and good, bad thinking and should, shouldn't thinking. So as you just saw in the conversation with Ray and I, my experience is it takes a lot of work to get to the place where you hang out up here all the time and nothing ever goes wrong, and your mind never gets taken to blame. So in all these places below the line, it's a simplistic cause-effect logic of victimization of some kind, of powerlessness of some kind, meaning the cause is something that I can't do anything about, right? However, what we've found distinctions, and each distinction is its own mental state. That mental state carries its own attractor field patterns with it. In blame, it's a simplistic cause-effect logic that says that the cause is outside of me, and in fact the cause is an entity that can be pointed at and named, and for my problem to go away, that entity should change. And we can get stuck in these mental states for a second or a minute or a day or a week or a month or a year or a lifetime, or we can get off of them because they're just mental states. But as long as we're in the mental state, the only logic available to us is the simplistic cause-effect logic there. So if we're smart and have lots of tools and we're in blame, then we use all those tools to prove that that person or that company or that department or that function or that client should change in order for us to be happier. And how many of you are really good at changing others? Anybody? Right. No. So we come to learn that blaming is powerlessness. And if we learn that it's just a mental state, if we become aware of it, then we can get off of it. And we tend to graduate state by state up through this pattern in our minds. So justify is identical to blame, except instead of blaming an entity, we're blaming conditions and situations. So I can't have what I want because of the budget, because of process, because of time, because of the economy, because of COVID, right? So there's always something that has to change in order for us to have what we want. And justify is an especially pernicious mental state because it sounds so reasonable. I didn't have enough time, right? And of course, some of us who've looked at this deeply in Agile realize, oh, you had all the time in the world, you didn't prioritize, right? And so if I own it, right, oh, I didn't make this a priority, right? If I own it, I become more powerful because I see the choices that I made. If I say I didn't have enough time, then I'm not owning it, and I just buy into this reaction of I didn't have enough time, and I won't see the complex world that I lived in that made the choices that produced that result. If we decide to not justify, then the next thing that happens is our mind's sorting mechanism stops externalizing the causation and it internalizes. And it puts us in both positions of cause and effect. And we then say, oh, I'm the dummy. Right? I'm the dolt. I did this to myself. Gosh, will I never learn? So we call this shame. It's usually experienced as guilt. And this is in a different color because we call this pseudo responsibility. This is where society has taught us that if we're doing this, we're being responsible, right? So someone raises their hand, says, I did it, I made that mistake, I broke the bill, blame me. And what do people do, right? They go, oh, good girl, she's taking responsibility. Right? And I say, no, she's taking cause. Right? So this is where we get to say that the word responsibility has about 1 million meanings. Right? And at its very essence, the meaning is cause and effect. But after that, we put other ideas onto the meaning of it that are about emotionality and assigning power and victimhood and things like that. So society teaches shame, quit, obligation, and responsibility as, quote, being good, being a good, responsible citizen. And the reason we don't believe that shame is truly responsibility is because you're still, in shame, you're still in the lower mind. Right? In shame, you're still not accessing your resource mind. You're still not accessing your brilliance. It does create anxiety, more anxiety, which creates action. So as authorities, parents, bosses, we learn to shame each other because it generates anxiety, which gets them into action. But what you want to ask is whether or not that action is really the most effective. So here's a little chart of the responsibility process that says that when we operate in blame and justify, we get no results. And when we operate in shame and obligation, we get unsatisfying results. And when we operate in responsibility, we produce results that matter, both in terms of the value for whoever we're in service to, as well as the experience for ourselves and our team and the people that we're in service to. So move along. So the issue in shame is that we have an attribution, a belief, we have a presumption in shame that there's something wrong with us. And that leads to a perception that we deserve this problem and that we must serve penance of some kind. And, you know, the way we learn to do this, and especially the more successful people in society in terms of education and career development and job growth and contributing to society, the better we do that, really the more attuned we are to this, because our whole lives we've paid attention to the messaging we're getting, around what's wrong with you. And we learn to be better at telling ourselves something's wrong with us than the outside world. And what I want to tell you is, if you're prone to this, and I know most of us are, I want to tell you there's nothing wrong with you. If you find yourself beating yourself up for having a problem or making a mistake or being in a situation, then you're absolutely human. And humans go through this process and land here through conditioning, stay there. And if you do that, then there's nothing wrong. Right? So for me, when I'm beating myself up, the reminder is, oh, I'm human. I'm operating normally. This is where all people land when they quit externalizing and start to internalize. And if you want to start figuring out a what to do about that, You should see I've got my cards all organized here, but now I'm showing them out of order because isn't that the way we want to operate? Is you know what makes sense at the moment? So the best question I've found to ask myself when I'm beating myself up, feeling guilty, having made a problem or a mistake, is to ask myself, what do I want? What do I want about this? Right? And here's why. Society taught me to ask, what should I do? Right? Think about how many times a week you're talking to somebody else about a situation or a problem, and one of you says, what should I do, or what should we do? Or sometimes you say, what's the right answer? What's the best practice? Right? What do the top 10% do in this situation? And what I have to tell you is that those questions, what should I do, and what's the right answer, they map to shame and obligation on this chart, which means they map to the lower mind, right? They map to the mind that's seeking approval, different one. They map to the mind that's seeking approval, safety, and control. They do not map to the mind that's seeking unique inspiration, unique tool set, unique genius, unique self-expression. The question that does map to responsibility, that does map to the upper mind, is what do I want about this, or what do we want in a team setting? This is the fastest shortcut I know to resourceful thinking, to responsibility thinking when we have a problem. Is the question, what do I want, or what do we want? And so moving up from shame, I'm not going to talk about quit today because I want to get to your questions. If we decide to stop beating ourselves up, then the next thing that happens is we feel trapped. We feel trapped in a promise, a commitment, a flow, a pattern that we don't think we can change. We call this the mental state of obligation. And in the mental state of obligation, we are sure that we have to be somebody, do something, or put up with having something that we don't want. Right? So the mental state of obligation is the mental state of being trapped. It's the mental state of having no choice. We say, I have to. I have no choice. Right? And look how close it is to complete choice. Right? It's so close. So obligation is also pseudo-responsibility. Right? You've been taught all your life to do what you're supposed to do, even if you despise it. Right? And so we all get, those of us who are professional, those of us who sign up to be really good people and good employees, those of us, we get really good about obligation. And so then there's a huge industry around coping skills. Right? And somewhere along the line, we're taught that coping with crap is a success skill. Right? And there's, I don't know how big the market is for coping, but I did a study a little while ago, or a quick search on Amazon for titles with cope or coping in the title, and it was over 40,000 titles. Right? I'm pretty sure it's a big market. I'm pretty sure there's more people interested in buying coping solutions for dealing with their lives of shame and obligation than there are people interested in responsibility. I could probably make a better living because I know a lot about coping. I just think it's so underrated. I think it's, overrated. I think coping is terribly overrated. I would much rather grow than cope. And so responsibility thinking is also a skill for getting rid of coping and moving to responsibility, which is the mental state of freedom, choice, and power. Responsibility, so these are all mental states, and responsibility is a mental state too. And it's the mental state where we feel totally free, which is an amazing feeling. Right? Unless it gives you anxiety, because when you feel totally free, then that means you get to take responsibility for who you are and what you do, and you don't get to blame anybody else, right? So in the mental state of responsibility, you feel tremendous freedom. You feel at choice or at cause in your world. So when I use the word at choice or at cause, think of it in terms of at effect in the cause effect equation, right? So are you at the position of cause or at the position of effect? And in all of these areas, we perceive that we are at effect. And in the mental state of responsibility, we realize that we are at cause, which feels amazing, right? I created this life. I created this experience today, right? This is mine, and I get to own it, and it's amazing. So it's the mental state of freedom, choice, and power, right? So power is derived from meaning, right? So meaning can be in our purpose, right? It can be in our values. Meaning can be in our authenticity. Meaning can be in our inspiration. Meaning can be in our genius. Meaning can be in our self-expression. So when we're able to tap into the most important meaning of who we are in our life, then we have exceptional power. We align with very high energy fields of being able to be who we are and get things done that are in line with that. So I want to move us to questions, so I'm going to be brief here. So you can't do anything about this process, right? It's always there, as far as we can tell. It's always active. It gets triggered by anxiety, right? And we start at the bottom and we get to climb up. And what you can do something about is you can do something about the 3 keys to responsibility. And these are the 3 keys of accessing and practicing responsibility and mastering responsibility. And the keys are intention, awareness, and confront. And again, you're going to get the scans of these so that you can review them if you like. Intention, awareness, and confront are all elements of our consciousness. And they're capabilities of our mind that we're born with, but society didn't generally develop. And what we do in responsibility thinking is we develop our intention, which is our free will, our power of thinking about what we want to do or produce or be or choose, intention, right? And we develop our awareness. Our awareness is simply paying attention, what we're paying attention to, what we're seeing, what we're perceiving. So that's a big element of our consciousness. That's a capability we're born with. And our confront, which just means our ability to face, which taps into our courage to sit in our anxiety and examine our thoughts about what we're producing here. So quick example. Okay. I told you the fastest shortcut I know to responsibility thinking is the question, what do I want? Well, that taps directly to intention, right? To free will and to choice. And in terms of awareness, right, I don't know if you can see this, and darn it, I can't hold it up to the whole camera. But this is a picture of some cows behind a couple of strands of barbed wire fence. Now, what's keeping those cows contained? Is the barbed wire keeping them contained? Or is their perception of the boundary keeping them contained? Right? So awareness is about what are we attending to? Right? You say, well, cows aren't sentient creatures. Right? Yeah, but I am. Right? And so we make up boundaries. And what this shows me is that I can change what I'm paying attention to. And when I change what I'm paying attention to, it changes my perception of cause and effect. And that changes my choices and my power. And so that's an illustration of confront, right? Is I get to face that, and I get to face that in myself, that things aren't always exactly what they seem. right? And that maybe I don't want to actually think things through and act until I can get myself to the top here. Um, so I'm going to give you uh, I'm going to give you a link to a resource I have for you, and I just put it in the chat. And this is a Google Doc that hopefully it's all unlocked. I tested it, and you can access it. And the Google Doc has some links to the scans for today, has links to a LinkedIn article uh, about responsibility and agility. And it has links to a resource that you might want to think about downloading and taping up on your wall that just says, what do I want? Thanks, Scott. I see your chat that says the link works.
I was thinking of making that for my wall to put up next to my clock, and you've made one.
Yeah, I made one for you. Right. So I recommend posting two things. I recommend posting the responsibility process and this. So the LinkedIn article is just about how Agile leaders use responsibility thinking to be more effective. And it just mentions a few things. One is there's a whole bunch of people in agility that think that responsibility thinking is the very essence of agility, because it's the essence of understanding change as we know it. And every time something goes wrong around us, every time something creates change, it breaks our perception of the world, which means we have something we don't want. And our mind goes to blame, and we have to climb in order to accept change and choose change. And so some people think that responsibility is the very essence, the ability to respond. It talks about the value in Agile of responding to change, right, over following a plan. It speaks to the principle of self-organizing, which is what so many people see responsibility thinking being introduced to teams, and Agile transitions really helps with self-organizing and self-leadership. And then it also speaks to humanity, right? So when you really start to understand the responsibility process, you start to realize there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, there's nothing wrong with anybody. Everybody's always doing the best they know how. So it introduces great compassion in dealing with each other. When we bring responsibility thinking into a culture, we have a new language for languaging problem thinking, and languaging being stuck, and languaging not knowing what to do. And we actually can talk about our blaming or our shaming or being an obligation. And then we can, being able to talk about that and not having it be bad or wrong or horrible, but instead humane, allow us to start thinking about what to do. So that's where I want to. So I invite you to lead yourself first, and we'll lead with questions for the rest of our time together. So I'd love if you would come on
I have to
screen.
jump off, but I've got something else coming up at 11. I thought this was brilliant. Thank you so much for existing in this world. I find myself trying to help people understand this all the time because we are placed in boxes and we all have these coping mechanisms. That's one thing that stops my husband and I from arguing a lot, is I just sit and say, wait, hold on, this could be a coping mechanism. Let's think about this. Where is this coming from? And it really helps our communication. So thank you 1,000 times. You're brilliant.
Jacqueline, thank you very much. I appreciate that so much. And can I offer you a teeny tiny bit of mentoring as you go?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't have to jump off. You want to.
Well, I promised that I would be somewhere at
Stop
11.
it. Stop it. I am committed to something else right now. I am going
Yes.
there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I am committed to something else, and I am going there.
Yeah, right. So have to is trigger language.
Perfect. Thank you so much for stopping me and helping me with that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to.
Absolutely.
All right, be well. Thank you.
Yes,
All right.
I sent you a LinkedIn invite.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right.
Other questions or others? By the way, I have not paid attention to the chat, so
There aren't any
something
questions.
in the chat that I should know about, let me know, please.
No, I've had a scan. Uh, this has been a really interesting talk for me. I'm completely unfamiliar with the material. I Two things from this. The first thing is, I think I've only been happy once in my life, and it was 12 years ago. I walked across the Camino de Santiago, across Spain, for 45 days. And when I got to the end of it, I was incredibly happy. I was in responsibility. I quit my job. I got divorced. I really owned everything I was doing. And I'm liking this because I can't take 45 days off to walk across Spain all the time, every time I want to get happy. Or is it I don't want to? There's maybe I'm living an obligation there. The other thing is, I'm realizing I'm living so much in blame, real blame. And there was honestly, the language here expresses a call that we just had with my colleagues where there was lots and lots of finger pointing and blame and everything else. And I withdrew from the conversation because I wasn't very comfortable with it, but I didn't have the language. I didn't have the language to engage with the others to say, yeah, why are we pointing the finger? Yeah. So I'm loving it.
Very cool.
Desperate to,
Yeah,
I'm gonna learn more about this. It's really activated me. Thank you.
right. So let me say a couple of things, Scott. So intention, awareness, and confront are elements of our consciousness, right? Conscious leadership, conscious organization is a big topic right now in agility and other places. And a lot of people make it pretty mysterious and say that you have to meditate and you have to pray and, you know, lots of other things, which I have no problem with that. I invest a lot of time and attention in meditation and praying, and it does help my consciousness. But a very practical approach to consciousness development is to practice intention awareness and confront every day, every time something goes wrong. So the first intention is to create a desire, a commitment to self to get to responsibility ultimately around every upset or frustration in our life. Right? Not because you're a better person or because you should, but because that's where you get rid of the problem. Right? That's the only place where you get to get rid of the problem is from the mental state of responsibility. So I have a tremendous intention to take responsibility for everything in my life that upsets me. And the biggest thing in my life that upsets me is that the world doesn't understand how responsibility works in our minds. And so instead of walking around saying they should change, I got to do something about it. You know, which means I should change to figure out how to create awareness, how to create a market, how to figure out should this be profit, nonprofit, both, you know, leaders, school, parents, you know, where do I go with this material? So that said a second thing about intention, which is then we practice, the second way to practice intention is, what do I want? Right? What makes me feel good, happy, useful, of service, valuable? What allows me to fully express? What taps into my unique inspiration, my unique genius in this situation? Right? So in the situation that I've been in for 30 years of promoting responsibility, it's my ability as a student and a teacher and a performer. That's my unique genius. I'm actually not very good at practicing this. Right.
Thank you.
That's the reason I teach it, is I most need it. But my skills, again, are as a performer and as a student and teacher. So awareness then is the way you practice awareness is becoming better and better at knowing who you are when you're in these mental states. That's all. Right? And I'll give you one key is a lot of people, when they start practicing this, when they catch themselves in one of these mental states, they get frustrated and annoyed and they judge themselves as wrong and they beat themselves up. And so what we teach, and all that does is send you to shame. So what we teach is compassion for self, seeing this as a signal device and celebrating it when we catch ourselves in one of the mental states below the line. Yay, I'm in obligation. Now I can figure out what I want so I can get out of it. Yay, I'm blaming. Right? Yeah. And then confront is just the ability to, so this is really where contemplation and reflection comes in. This is the ability to go into our own head and see where our programming is is messed up, and to see how we want to change that. So thank you for your question about that. The other thing that I want to say is talking about being in a meeting with blame is again this idea of no results in blame and justify, unsatisfying results in shame and obligation, and results that matter in responsibility. My client and friend George Reed, I think we have a video of him on our website, responsibility.com. He told me about inventing a little tool that he calls the art of the management pivot. And the way he uses it is when he's in one of those crisis meetings, right? So when you think about this getting triggered every time something goes wrong, how many meetings do you have at work around shipping something that had gone wrong, right? So how many meetings do you have, how many meetings at work are problem oriented, right? Are reaction to a problem oriented, right? The majority of them are. So how active do you think this is in those meetings, in the minds of the people in those meetings? And so what George says is that he finds himself in meetings where, the theme of the meeting is all around blame and justify. And we've all been in meetings where we've burned up hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars of the company money, having meeting after meeting after meeting, and the conversation never gets above blame or justify. And what he says is he doesn't make anybody wrong. He has tremendous compassion, and he looks for an opportunity for there to be a little airspace, and he gets the attention of the people in the meeting. And, he says something like the following. He says, I really don't have anything to contribute around the current theme of, who or what caused this problem. But I have a lot of energy to contribute to what we want to do about it, right? And I'm ready to start that conversation. Who's with me? Right? And it's just that, what a brilliant little device. He doesn't make them wrong. He doesn't say, you're not being responsible. He just says, I don't have anything to contribute right now, but what I am ready to contribute to is to thinking about what we want. So thank you for your prompt there, Scott. Other questions?
I have one. First of all, what you said for me is like the meme with the dog drinking coffee and everything burning around him. I don't know if you know that meme, because outside people always could have problems or said that you have problems in the company, but you are talking about my calm, not what is happening around me, is how I consider. First of all, like a comment. And my question is how I work with that to communicate to others around me my concern about the things that happen around, but not with blame, not mark someone who did wrong. How I say, okay, I understand that the things are wrong, because people want to see that I'm concerned about that. But if I come, they consider that I don't aware about the problems. I don't know if you understand my question, where I go.
Not completely, but let me try a minute or two response. And if I'm completely off base, then you can ask again, and maybe others can help interpret your question for me in case I'm not understanding it. So I think it starts with you showing up how you are and taking responsibility for yourself and your world. So, you know, one of my main mottos is lead yourself first. And so I'll say this. So for me, I believe most of what's taught about leadership is not absolutely correct. It's not completely on target. Um, and that's because leadership is taught as a behavioral skill set. And it's taught as a set of morals and ethics. Well, the thing is, those morals and ethics are always changing with the times, right? So if you go and look at the books written on responsible leadership, they're not about practicing responsibility. They're about what you're paying attention to. Are you paying attention to people? Are you paying attention to the planet? You know, etc. And today, the stuff around leadership that we're teaching in Agile is about, are you paying attention to inclusion and diversity and empathy and safety? So I believe true leadership is actually a byproduct. It's a byproduct, it's not a main effect. It's a byproduct of an individual who is in pursuit of taking ownership of some space or some problem or some opportunity that's bigger than them. Right? And therefore, they require help. And they attract other people to them through a whole variety of different ways. Right? It could be through the vision or the purpose or the mission, or it could be through their own, you know, the way they show up. So what I'm saying is that if you discover who you are, your genius, your inspiration, you're brilliant, even if you discover it incrementally over time, I'm still discovering mine, right? And if you do your work to understand your fundamental values and principles as a human being, and then if you find a big problem or opportunity that you want to take ownership of and dedicate yourself to as either a long purpose or a short purpose, right, then don't be surprised if you will find people flocking to you to help, right? Because you are inspiring instead of intimidating. You are freeing instead of controlling. Right? So I think your question made me think of, you know, first, Alejandro, you want to start with how are you showing up? What are you standing for? How are you inspiring those around you as opposed to trying to convince, influence, cajole those around you? And, you know, what our research says is if we want others, you know, if we're noticing that others aren't taking responsibility, then our first principle of that is that this only works when self-applied. Right? So this does not work as a management tool. It doesn't work as a weapon. It doesn't work as an evaluation tool, right? To hit somebody over the head, say you're stuck in justify. All right. So I hope you don't get off this call and go to your favorite person and say, honey, I now know what's wrong with you. Right? You're stuck in blame. That'll backfire. So this only works with self-applied. So the answer to your question, Alejandro, is how do I perhaps affect or influence or get other people to operate at higher levels of resourcefulness? Well, that's the question. Right? That is the question. How do I show up differently so that other people will show up differently? And for me, it starts with leading myself first. Then it starts with demonstrating responsibility as the most effective reality. Right? So Max Dupree, in the book called, I think, The Art of Leadership, said that the first job of a leader is to define reality. So if we show up in a meeting and we're blaming as the leader, right, then we're essentially socializing our teammates to blame as a way of coping around here. And if we're justifying, we're teaching them to justify. If we show up as a leader and say, I don't know how the heck this happened. I don't know the cause of it, but I know it's a problem for me and for us. And therefore, if it's a problem for us, we're the ones who get to contribute to the solution. We're the ones who get to take ownership for it. So start thinking about what do we want. And then the next thing I would do, Alejandro, is I would actually start figuring out how to teach this process to people so that you have a shared language of responsibility and you have a concept to talk about what it really means to take ownership, to become more resourceful. And I hope that addressed your question. Did it come close?
For me, it's a very good question. Probably have a lot of other questions by the topic, because, for example, you said my leadership is first, about myself. How I show the other that I'm more important than for example, the company, the project, the other things that the company are important also. How I put my boundaries and show that that is better for the company also, or the project also.
Well, then, if those are your values, then you demonstrate that. That's my answer to you. If those are your values, you take responsibility for clarifying that and demonstrating that.
Thanks, amazing.
Cool. So, yeah, so, I've been around this idea of value-based management for most of my career. It's this idea goes back at least earlier than when I started studying organizational science in the 80s. Value-based management. And one of the tools that's always been taught is if you want your superiors to buy into a change, or even your peers, right, then figure out how to root that change in the published values of your organization. So, what else? Other questions?
Christopher, I just want to add, this has been going in an amazing way, and I can just identify one experiment that proved to me very helpful, but I was thinking it's very helpful, but today I can just go in the back of the mind of the people and understand how that was effective. So we were doing some of the meetings when we were keeping the agenda very generic. And in the beginning of the meeting, we were asking folks that, what is your intention for this meeting? What is that you are here? And we got a couple of inputs in the beginning, first 1 or 2 minutes. And then we had a very meaningful, effective meetings, because everyone was participating because they had some mental commitment that they are here because they want to do something. And that was just creating that effect when everyone was taking responsibility, everyone was going for their creative ideas. And today I just got a sense of what was actually happening behind the scenes when we were asking folks that what is your intention for this meeting, and keeping the agenda very light and generic. So to me, it's a powerful thing to understand what was really happening.
Yeah, beautiful, Mahesh. Thank you. Yeah, nice contemplation on your part, and thinking through that. Well done. Yeah.
A little bit of synchronicity. In one of the talks earlier today, we were talking about intentionality, and I kind of captured the phrase, which I quite liked. And again, it's another one for the wall, which was my nationality is intentionality. I like mantras. I've been picking up a lot today. I think I've been meeting a lot of incredibly smart people and new ideas, and yeah. But when I get a bit of synchronicity, I think that's something to think about.
Yeah. So again, intention, awareness, and confront are all aspects of our consciousness, and therefore, if you want to ascend in consciousness, if you want to develop, grow, practicing these is really good. Most people don't develop these. Again, society did not develop these, and most of us are, our well-intended parents and teachers and bosses. They focused on our intellectual mind. They focused on mostly the content of our thinking, and they focused on our behavior, but they really didn't focus on our spiritual. I mean, you know, when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about the human spirit and the human mind growing with that spirit. And so when most people develop, you know, get introduced to these ideas, it's in a personal growth program, a leadership growth program, or a spiritual growth program. And in fact, awareness of self is the number one element of leadership development programs for something like the last 80 years. So if you think about leadership development programs that you've been through, you think about the amount of time that they put into 360 feedback, personality inventories, knowing yourself better in relation to others, all of that kind of stuff. And most of those programs key on one of these three elements, Scott. So the idea of intentionality is a whole field all by itself, right? Except when you get into that field, it calls on awareness and confront. Right? So, you know, I really want $1 million. How come I haven't been able to produce it? Speaking of confront, right? And, you know, another set of so the intentional thing also, you know, purpose-driven life, all of the purposeful, intentional stuff. Awareness is probably the most prominent of these three, having been in the eye of the organizational worker for so many years, that awareness is the first step to change. And awareness for many people is equated with consciousness. So again, if you get into studies of awareness, that calls on intention and confront. And confront is a unique word for us, and we chose it because it really means a bold ability to face ourselves, to face our own anxiety, to face our own you know, negative programming, and take ownership of it. But the programs out there that would equate with this one are the ones that focus on courage, the whole idea of fearlessness, which I actually, while I love Linda Rising and others, I personally don't believe in fearlessness. I believe in stepping into my fear. I don't believe it'll ever go away. And,
I
you know,
think I'm with
leadership-
you. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Yeah.
Right. But fearlessness is great marketing, right? It's,
Yeah.
you know, great positioning.
And Linda is lovely.
So what the research shows is that actually, as we step to the edge of our comfort zone, we're doing so fully feeling our anxiousness, our angst. And it's most intense just as we enter. Yeah, I love Linda. Absolutely love her and love her ideas. All right. So she must be a great marketer because she chose a title that's very attractive. I just don't buy the way the concept is used in everyday life. But what happens when we go to the edge of our comfort zone is the anxiety is the most intense at the beginning of the experience. And then as we get just seconds or minutes into the experience, the anxiety dissipates. So, you know, if you think about your first time public speaking, or, you know, facing the principal, or, you know, something like that, if you can think about this, the angst is the worst in anticipation of it, and then as it starts, and then it tends to go to the background. And so what I teach people is to have repeated experiences of confronting their anxiety, going to the edge of their comfort zone. And when the experience is over, to say to yourself, I'm not dead. It didn't kill me. So that we actually become a friend of our ability to face our anxiety when we do that. So Belinda, do you have a question?
No, I don't, but it was very interesting to hear your view on from blame going to taking responsibility, and how often you basically shift between the two multiple times on a daily basis. I think the more you get aware from it and you want to make a choice, then you can make a choice, even though sometimes how difficult it can be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you have an ongoing anxiety with some situation in your life, and then you realize it's not just been a month, it's not just been a year, it's not just been 10 years, and you decide to truly face it and take ownership for it, and you realize that this means some fundamental change in your pattern, whether it's relationships or job or religion or you know,
Yeah, true.
something else.
Yeah, I changed jobs, I think 3-4 months ago. And it took me 2-3 weeks before I realized that I didn't want to stay where I was. And as soon as you take the decision, it's such a relief to basically say, okay, this is my choice, this is where I want to go, and take actions further from it.
That's
Yeah,
the freedom. Yeah, that's
true.
the freedom. Yeah, in all of my mentoring, I get to see that relief over and over and over as I help people, identify where they're stuck. And I ask them questions that come from, 30 plus years of doing this and expertise and being able to poke at places that they don't know to poke. And, my job is to help them bust out of wherever they are. And when they see that, my job is to help them see how they created
Mhm.
this in their own mind, not to
Yeah,
make them wrong about it, just to see how they created it. And as soon as they see this clearly, it goes poof, right? Yeah, and that's I get to see that relief. I get to see that immediate breakthrough to freedom and choice and power. And the path becomes clear. People go, oh, I know what I have to do.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Cool. Any final words?
Have their own elevator, or management and leadership has way nicer offices.
Maybe Mona's going to come on and give us the final word. All right. Maybe not. Maybe she thinks she's coming in the middle and we're not at the middle.
That